Welcome to I Can't Believe It's Not News with Beth and Elizabeth.
Hey Beth, how's it going?
What do you mean? Why are you asking me that?
In order to find out, it's just a pleasantry.
Well, you're the one who put that microchip in me, so you always know where I am.
Whoa, hey. Where did this come from?
I have to tell you something that happened to me.
Okay.
So I bought my husband a chair for the patio, and it leans all the way back. And the first time I got in it, I leaned back, and there was a plane flying right above my house, and there was chemtrails. And now I'm pretty sure that Obama is trying to wiretap me through my microwave.
Wow, that's a lot in there. You have a problem, hun.
Is there a doctor in the house?
Actually, as a matter of fact, there is. We just happen to have Dr. Dan Jolley from Staffordshire University in the UK with us. He is a psychology professor, and he specializes in the study of conspiracy theories.
Oh, thank goodness.
Hi, Dan.
Hi, Beth. Thanks so much for having me here.
And thank you so much for being here.
Those pesky microwaves, eh?
Yes.
Those pesky espionage devices.
Thanks, Kellyanne Conway.
Yeah. We're so excited to have you here with us. We have no idea how we ended up with someone of your stature on our show. Thank you for joining us. You're like a real professional in the field.
You were just being too kind, but please keep it up. It's fine. No, honestly, thanks so much for inviting me. I'm really excited to be here and to talk about conspiracy theories.
So, Dan, go ahead and tell us just a little bit about yourself and your background.
So I started my PhD at the University of Kent, which is in Canterbury in the UK. And this was on the topic of conspiracy theories. I then stayed at Kent for 3 years before moving to Lancaster, where I did a postdoc job. I then joined the academic team at Staffordshire University, where I teach undergraduates, but I also do research. Now, my research actually is still in the psychology of conspiracy theories. So I'm very much immersed in that kind of field. So that's kind of my career history in a bit of a nutshell, really.
Wow. So that's a field of study in the UK.
That is right, yeah. And jobs as well. Yeah.
So there's do you want to do clinical psychology, social psychology, conspiracy theory psychology?
So I would be classed on the umbrella of social psychologist. So it's understanding why we believe certain things, why we do certain things. And that kind of thing in my area is conspiracy theories. So my PhD title is a social psychology PhD. It's just my kind of thesis and my research is conspiracy theories. So that's kind of my umbrella.
So it's very fortuitous that you got into this area because, back in the day, years ago when you were studying it, it might have maybe seemed like some kind of fringe thing, but now it's just everywhere.
Absolutely. And what I left out in my career history is that I actually did my bachelor's thesis on belief in conspiracy theories. So that's back in the day where I was just thinking, well, what can I do for my final year thesis in my bachelor's? What interests me? And conspiracy theories were kind of one of those things that always fascinated me. And indeed, you're right. Even back then, which is 2010, there was hardly any research on that at all. And when I posed my idea to the supervisors in my department, they were really interested in kind of supporting me to do this research. And after kind of doing my bachelor's, I was still kind of fascinated by the research process, but also conspiracy theories. And that's why I then moved to Kent to work with the professor, Cameron Douglas, who's an expert in the field. And that's where my kind of master's and PhD grew from. So I've very much been immersed in the literature of conspiracy theories for a very long time. And I can see how it's flourished, how it started off 2010 with hardly any research, whereas now we know a lot more about conspiracy theories and why people believe in them and what the consequences of believing could be.
Wow. I got to ask, Dan, were you an X-Files fan?
Actually, no, it wasn't. I've never really watched X-Files, to be honest with you. I was more just fascinated by like the Diana conspiracy theories, and which is quite popular at the time when I was kind of looking into this, and just people's kind of talking so freely about them. I just wondered, well, why do people believe in them? And I didn't necessarily realise back doing my bachelor's how undeveloped the research area was. Because to me, as kind of a naive student, it was just interesting. Whereas, yeah.
I was going to ask, do you have a collection of tinfoil hats?
I don't have a collection of tinfoil hats. Although
that's a shame.
I do actually have a photograph of my dad wearing a tinfoil hat. A bit of background is at the university, we had a competition to demonstrate our research in a photograph. So I was thinking, well, how can you really demonstrate conspiracy theories in a photograph? And there's a misconception that conspiracy theorists are paranoid people who wear tinfoil hats. And that's the conception of when you think of conspiracy theorists. But as you'll kind of learn throughout kind of this podcast, that's not really true. Everyone's susceptible to believing conspiracy theories. So I felt it was quite ironic to have a picture of a man in a tinfoil hat who, again, is the kind of stereotype of someone who believes in a conspiracy theory. So we made a tinfoil hat and I had him pose for a picture. And if you look on my social media, on my Twitter, at Dr. Daniel Jolley, bit of a plug, you'll see the picture on there. And it's
nice.
just a great way to kind of demonstrate the misconception, because it makes people think, well, actually, yeah, that's who I think is a conspiracy theorist. When in actual fact, that's not true. That's just our kind of stereotypes, our mental shortcuts of who we think actually endorses them.
I love it. Can we post that picture on
absolutely.
Twitter?
I can send it to you, absolutely, because I use it now as in my talks, just as a way to kind of start the conversation of who believes in conspiracy theories. And
I think that maybe part of the reason why it was so understudied is because there was a stereotype and an assumption that, this isn't a harmful thing, really. These people are just quacks. And so people didn't really look at it.
You're absolutely correct. And indeed, people seem to be commenting saying it's harmless fun. But that if it's only the paranoid people in tinfoil hats who are on the out fringes of society who believe in conspiracy theories, what is the harm? It's only when the polls, the last 10 years or so, has demonstrated that millions of people endorse conspiracy theories. So not everyone can obviously have a tinfoil hat or be paranoid. There must be other explanations, more everyday explanations that explain why so many endorse conspiracy theories. So yeah, misconceptions.
So what drives people to start a conspiracy theory?
What's a really good point. So let me kind of pose an example. You hear about a missing plane. How does that make you feel? Like,
Scared.
How do you scared? Okay, cool. Scared. Anything else?
Sad.
Cool.
I'm wondering what happened. I want to know.
Yeah. Do you feel anxious? Kind of anxious or out of control?
Maybe.
Well, that's exactly what we want you to say. Is because when
leading questions with Dr. Dan Jolley
straight away, but those feelings of kind of being out of control, being uncertain, having anxiety, not knowing what's happening, wanting to know what has happened. This is what drives a conspiracy theory, and kind of what makes them flourish, really, is that when planes go missing, and I mean, that's the example I've used, but they happen, in the last few years, really, and we look for explanations. So we want to know what happened. We want to know, what's causing this. So a conspiracy theory is a really kind of neat way of providing a quick answer to that problem, which then makes someone feel more in control, more certain, less anxious. They then got that answer to the problem. So it makes them feel better. Because we all have this desire to feel in control. So it's only natural for us to try and look for ways to do that. And conspiracy theories, that could be one route to do that.
So do you think that when someone starts a conspiracy theory that they actually believe it, Or do you think that there are conspiracies out there that are put out there for a more nefarious reason, such as clickbaity or to drive traffic to a website or to cause confusion on purpose?
Now, that is a really intriguing question. And I kind of struggle to really think of a good answer for that question, really. There's not necessarily any academic research that I could say, yes, this definitely would support that argument. So I'm answering it more of a personal basis, which, as mentioned, we have this desire for control, for certainty, etc. So the conspiracy theories enable us to feel better about ourselves and about society. So that wouldn't lead me to assume that people do believe in these conspiracy theories, because it's a way for them to feel better about what is happening, to feel less anxious, for example. But that doesn't necessarily say that some people may use conspiracy theories as a way to promote prejudice against other groups, for example, or promote their own agenda. But I think it's very much a case-by-case basis. But just speaking from a personal perspective, I think the majority would do this as a way to really believe the conspiracy theories. So they talk about the conspiracy theories as a way to not necessarily promote it for selfish means, but just because they're interested, and it enables them to have an answer to the problem. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, it sounds like the confusion on purpose is probably actually its own conspiracy theory about conspiracy theories.
Oh my gosh, that's so meta, Beth.
Conspiracy over conspiracy. Oh my, yes. Okay, that's a good answer.
Where it probably is more just a natural progression of maybe an idea that is put out there, and then more and more people start to latch onto it, and it probably grows, where it's not always put out as this, well-formed idea that's already grown to where it is a conspiracy theory.
That's interesting. I mean, conspiracy theories do grow over time. They get more complicated, potentially. They kind of develop as it goes through. So absolutely, it could just be, you say, conspiracy for conspiracy.
So, Dan, what do you think is the difference between conspiracy theory and fake news? Like, we're just wondering, where that line is. Is it just the size of the microphone? Like, a conspiracy theory is something that's kind of in the dark corner of the internet, and fake news is out there everywhere.
Well, that's a really interesting question. And I see them as two different things, because fake news can just be fake. It hasn't got to be conspiratorial, where it argues that there's powerful forces conspiring against the rest of us. It can just be something fake. But fake news is a fertile ground for conspiracy theories to flourish, because it can be a place for you to promote fake news by questioning those in authority, pointing fingers at different people, for example. So they're very different things, but conspiracy theories can, and indeed do, become a part of fake news. So they can be published on social media, etc., etc.
Okay, so in your Venn diagram, you have your little bit of overlap, but fake news can be fake without being conspiratorial.
Absolutely. I mean, I wouldn't like to say how much fake news is just fake news, but indeed it can just be fake. Nothing conspiratorial at all. It's just, it can be an excellent place for conspiracy theories to flourish when they do.
What drives us humans to latch on and really believe these theories?
Well, that's a really good question. And there really is no one profile of a conspiracy theorist. As mentioned a bit earlier, it can be drivers of feeling out of control, uncertain, anxiety, as a way for us to latch on to conspiracy theories. But it can also be down to cognitive shortcuts, because the world is a complicated place. Our brains have come accustomed to making shortcuts for us to understand that complex world. And one of those shortcuts is proportionality bias. And it's the idea that big events must be explained by something equally as big. So a big event of, for example, meeting the love of my life today must be written in the stars. It can't just be a random bit of chance. That makes no sense. And this bias has been found in conspiratorial thinking. So, for example, JFK. big event when he died. Explaining that as government and conspiracy makes sense. Explaining that as a simple, lone gunman, kind of madman, really fits the bill. It doesn't really fit the bill. It doesn't really make sense. Mm-hmm. So a big event must be explained by something equally as big. So when that plane goes missing, you think, oh my God, it can't just be a malfunction. It must be something bigger. It must be, for example, the government being involved. Because just explaining it with a minor event as a malfunction doesn't fit the bill. And you can pretty much relate almost most conspiracy theories to this kind of line of thinking. Back in the UK example, Princess Diana, when she died, that was a really big event. Explaining it as a government conspiracy maintained proportionality. Explaining it as a drunk driver just doesn't really make sense. So we've got our cognitive biases.
Yeah, I can totally see that. I can see if you think about her death as a drunk driver trying to get away from paparazzi, it's more sad, really.
Absolutely. And if you couple that with feeling anxious and feeling out of control when that news broke, if you then think, well, Diana, she's such a big kind of star, a big person in our kind of hearts, it can't just be a car accident. It must be something as big. But I mean, crudely, if I was in a car crash, I very much doubt there'll be any conspiracy theories about that. But
I don't know.
Diana, different story. So that's kind of a bias in our mind that we go to straight away.
Dan Jolley, conspiracy theorist expert, died in a mysterious car crash.
Oh, don't say that now. No. Next time, I'm scared to go in the car next time. There's also our kind of belief systems. So one finding from some colleagues at Kent found that people believe in mutually contradictory conspiracy theories. So they can believe, for example, that Diana is both currently still alive, but also died for example, by the government or by another party. So obviously someone cannot be dead and alive at the same time, which doesn't really make sense. But what the authors kind of argued is that we have a central belief system. So if we don't trust those in authority, we don't trust kind of the official account, we can endorse multiple conspiracy theories. Because although the dead and alive are contradictory, if you imagine the central point is the bit that distrusts those around and distrusts authority. So as long as it makes sense with that, you can endorse multiple things.
It sounds like the person is saying, like, I don't believe that the story that we've gotten about her death is true. So these are the possibilities that I believe could
I'm
be
not
true.
saying for sure that she's still alive, but that's a possibility, and it's also a possibility that the Queen wanted her dead.
Right.
Absolutely, totally, 100%. So all these different things really demonstrate that it's not just middle-aged men, tinfoil hats, who believe conspiracy theories. They are an everyday phenomenon. We'll have a desire to be in control. We will have these mental shortcuts. And for some, they hold this belief system. So it's not just for paranoid people. And it's worth noting that, yes, paranoia is associated with belief in conspiracy theories, but so are these other different things. So it's very much, there isn't a profile of a conspiracy theorist, at least not yet, but we're learning a lot more about why people believe conspiracies. And indeed, it's not just paranoid people.
Wow.
So let's talk about how conspiracy theories influence elections and voters, because that is definitely on our minds here, and I know over there too.
Absolutely. So my research program particularly is looking into the consequences of conspiracy theories. So right at the start, we talked about, well, are they just harmless bits of fun? So I was really interested to kind of test this argument. And some of my own research has looked into voter engagement. And what I found is that if people are exposed to the idea that governments are involved in plots and schemes, it makes them feel powerless, that their vote will make a difference, leading them to be less likely to vote in an election. So kind of demonstrating disengagement with the process.
But they came out in droves for Donald Trump.
That's really, absolutely.
They're
that's really
in charge now.
Absolutely. So I think Donald Trump's a really interesting kind of character, and how he's used, in essence, the conspiracy theories rhetoric in his kind of campaigning.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'd be
From the
really interested to
beginning
see,
with the birth certificate.
Yeah,
Absolutely,
he was
yeah.
the birther.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. And what's kind of interesting is that typically conspiracy theories are believed about the other party. So Republicans are believed about Democrats and vice versa. Mm-hmm. So it'd be interesting now with Trump being in office, what kind of conspiracy theories will kind of surround him. And indeed, there already are kind of conspiracy theories and fake news where he consistently just says all kind of sources are fake and conspiracy theories. Whether they're true or not is kind of a different question. So the research demonstrates for some people it can lead to disengagement, but Donald Trump is definitely kind of a new kind of era of conspiracy theories in the mainstream.
Yeah. And we get into a problem with, over here we have Fox News, and so people have kind of different sources for credible news. So like people, if you talk to people who just watch Fox News, read Breitbart.com, they don't get everything that's going on with Russia and with all the problems with the Trump administration. But if you have people who read New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, fake news, whatever, right? And we talk to them, we sound like conspiracy theorists to them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. And indeed, kind of linked to that is that people seek out media that kind of confirms their beliefs. Because that's another kind of bias we have, in that it's called confirmation bias.
Yeah.
And when we believe a certain thing, let's say that particular conspiracy theory, everything that supports that conspiracy theory, we believe. Everything that discredits it or that argues against it, we discredit that source. So we seek out media sources that confirm our beliefs, that confirm our kind of what we think about the world. And indeed, that's kind of one problem potentially, is that if someone is so narrow-minded in the media they consume, that they're not necessarily thinking critically about that source, which kind of is kind of a way to deal with conspiracy theories potentially, and also fake news, is that it's not just relying on one piece of evidence, but it's thinking, well, who'd written this? What's the evidence base? Let's try and find this story on other news outlets or other sources to try and get a fuller picture of the argument. But that's kind of my idealistic way of dealing with news. And in reality, it's much more passive potentially. People are just kind of reading the news without really necessarily wanting to go and research it, which potentially is a problem for both fake news and also conspiracy endorsement. Because it can impact us in lots of different ways, not just with voting, but in other areas of society.
Yeah.
Whenever I hear about that, I think, okay, so I'm watching MSNBC or CNN. So if I subscribe to that, then technically I would have to go listen to Fox News. And then I think, hell no. Why would I subject myself to that?
Yeah, and it's because it's not the same. It's not the same. So when they say, oh, well, the Washington Post is a left-wing media outlet, and so you can't trust it, they don't have the same journalistic process that Fox News does.
Right.
They aren't trying to promote the agenda of the Democratic Party. Just, they do have a left lean, and you can definitely see that in the editorials, but the pieces that they write are the product of factual journalism, and they are trying to report facts. Over at Fox News, it is a propaganda machine for the Republican Party, and that is what they try to do. And they have opinion mixed up in their quote-unquote journalism.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
And it's difficult for the reader to kind of tap through that and see that.
It's really hard. It's really hard. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, Dan, I know in your blog, I was reading about system justification theory, and I wanted to see if you could explain that to us and how it relates to conspiracy theories.
So, as always, we have a desire, as everything talks about, to have a positive view of society that we live in. And when our society is threatened in varying different ways, we kind of have this motivation to defend and bolster the society that we live in, because we want to feel happy where we live, in essence. And we do multiple routes, such as stereotypes, where we believe stereotypes about the elderly or the young, whatever, as a way to kind of maintain differences in society, so we feel comfortable. Now, we propose that conspiracy theories could be one route that people do this with. So with a conspiracy theory, you typically blame a small group of people for some wrongdoings. You point an accusative finger at those in authority. Those are the bad apples. We in society, those around us, are the good people. We're the good, those are the bad. So when society is threatened, we can endorse a conspiracy theory by pointing the finger at those bad apples and thus making us more satisfied with those around us. So conspiracy theories could be one route to maintaining a positive view of society, which actually, when you say it like that, sounds quite positive. Great. It makes us feel better about the society that we live in. However, if someone feels satisfied with society as it is, they are not going to question inequality. They're not going to question status differences between different groups of people, which could actually reduce rather than increase social and political change. So I sort of see this as much more of a danger of conspiracy theories, because it's not going to lead to change potentially, because people are satisfied with where they live. They're not going to seek out inequalities.
And I think that also if something isn't based in fact, you're not going to see real change coming from that.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. So in one hand, it's quite positive, but it allows us to feel better about ourselves and society. But on the other, it could have some real serious consequences, which, as I mentioned earlier, it can impact our voting behaviours, but it can also stop us vaccinating. It can also stop us engaging in climate change, and then potentially can also stop us kind of questioning inequality.
Yeah.
It was reminding me when you were talking about it, about Pizzagate 2.0, Elizabeth, that we talked about a couple episodes ago, where they're blaming sex trafficking on elite liberals, and it's like blaming it on that small group of people to be like, this isn't a big problem, which it is. Like, it's not elite liberals. It's a problem.
Yeah.
That problem doesn't have a political barrier. It's not conservative versus liberal.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And it's everywhere too, right? I mean, the sex trafficking isn't just, things that happen in the US. So, Dan, do you see conspiracy theories around the world flourishing, or is this more of a Western problem or something from the US and the UK that you see mostly?
Absolutely across the world. It's not just a Western kind of phenomenon. It's very much a worldwide kind of people endorsing conspiracy theories about different groups and different people across the globe. And indeed, if we're just really kind of saying that they're flourishing now, it's kind of a discussion by itself, really. It's because conspiracy theories are popular, whereas other scholars suggest that, yes, conspiracy theories are popular, but they've always been popular. It's just today, with the internet being at our fingertips, the fact that we can kind of engage in discussions, the fact that people can listen to this podcast, for example, conspiracy theories are much more global. They're not as localized as they potentially used to be. So, indeed, we're much more able to communicate with different kinds of societies and kind of help the conspiracy theory kind of even get a much more bigger platform, really. So, absolutely not as a Western thing, and potentially they've kind of been popular throughout the world for a very long time. It's just with the internet, they're much more global than they've ever been before.
Last question for you. Do you think the government has been listening to this conversation? And should we be scared?
Oh, right. That's such a provocative question to ask. So it's kind of... It's back to my personal view, really, isn't it? And my personal view is kind of more positive, more optimistic, in that I kind of feel I have trust in society and kind of institutions, that we shouldn't necessarily be scared of that. But that's just coming from my personal view and kind of my outlook. Whereas if maybe I was feeling out of control and certain in different kind of environments, my thought pattern could be very different. Whereas right now. I'm quite comfortable. I feel reasonably, certain of what's happening, my kind of right now. So I'm not necessarily latching on to a conspiracy theory, but things certainly change. And indeed, we all have these desires, as mentioned. We all have these biases inside us. So not saying that one day I might necessarily feel scared by this, and watching us. But for right now, I'm quite positive. Let's turn it then on you two. What do you two think? Do you think we should be scared?
Well, I'm going to say I felt like you just described before November of 2016.
Oh.
Right.
After that, I feel like I have acquired some very legitimate anxiety. And you know what, though? How it's kind of manifested itself. So we live in the Pacific Northwest. We live in the quote unquote ring of fire. And we are in a very earthquake prone zone. And the area that I am in has not had a major earthquake in a very, very long time, like a couple of 100 years, and we are so due. And I've never been like of a prepper mentality. I'm like, it'll be okay. But since November, I've started really thinking about that. And I've started thinking about, what am I going to do if an earthquake comes? What am I going to do if North Korea sends a nuke our way and I'm not killed in the initial blast, but I'm just around? Like, how do I prepare for that? And so now I have a whole bunch of canned goods underneath my stairs and bottled water. And a battery powered radio. And, it's not like crazy, it's just like normal things that you should probably have in case an earthquake does happen. This is very legitimate,
Right.
But it's things that I just kind of shrugged off before. But I think that I have anxiety now.
Yeah, I feel the same way. In fact, I remember before the election, like when Obama was the president, and you would hear some of the more conservative people talking about, like, we got to be prepared in case he comes to try to take our guns and everything. And now I'm like, I kind of feel that way about the government right now. I'm like a little worried that they're going to try to take over. And I used to be like, well, who do you think this government is that's going to come take your guns or that's going to take over? Like, it's literally the people that live around you are your neighbors that work for the government and stuff. And do you really think that's going to happen? And now I'm kind of like, that might happen. Like, I probably should be a little bit weary of a couple of things, but then I try to pull itself back. But it's also funny with the Russian thing that when we're doing the research on it, literally it sounds just like a conspiracy theory. And I know that Hillary's campaign was saying that. They were like, we sound like conspiracy theorists, but it's true. Like, this is happening. Like, Russia is hacking our election and nobody's listening to us because it sounds crazy.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's that kind of really fine line between conspiracy theory and what is happening, really. And indeed, you mentioned it, but there are some conspiracy theories that have been proven to be true, which kind of makes it more interesting, really, for me, is that conspiracy theory really can change, Annie, and kind of change to official account.
Which ones? Which
Yeah.
ones?
So, like Watergate, for example, and those kind of conspiracy theories. But it's just that when a conspiracy theory stays a conspiracy theory, how that could impact and how that could kind of really kind of have an effect. Because as I mentioned at the start, I've looked into kind of ways to combat the negative effects of conspiracy theories. And what I found in some of my current research is that potentially they're quite resistant to correction. Once someone endorses a conspiracy account, it can actually be really hard to kind of knuckle down and get them to resist that message. Because conspiracy theories can change our beliefs. It can change the way we see the world without us necessarily even realising. And I know someone may be thinking, well, are all conspiracy theories bad? Well, no, they're not. Absolutely not. And I do try and keep that in mind, is that there is some conspiracy theories that maybe won't have any impact on the wider world, for example, such as the idea that Paul McCartney was replaced by a lookalike.
Oh my gosh, I was talking to my husband about this yesterday. Oh my gosh, that's so funny.
I just don't think potentially believing in that will stop you voting or engaging in climate change, for example. And indeed, what I've mentioned at the start about it helping us feel in control, feel certain, well, that's obviously positive things. Making someone feel in control, well, that's a good thing, at least in my view. But then I kind of think about, well, it can have some serious bad consequences, such as voting, anti-vaccine, etc.
Yeah.
So why can't we feel in control via other means? Why does it have to be endorsing conspiracy theories? So my kind of current work is kind of looking into ways to intervene without it necessarily being kind of about counter arguments or about kind of arguing against a conspiracy theory, but using other kind of ways to intervene.
When you were talking about it earlier, I was thinking that it sounds like conspiracy theories are like a substitute for Valium.
That's a good. And then once you start it, you can't necessarily stop because it comes to us immersing your belief system.
And you get on this train and it's hard to get off. You know, but I think that
when the bias takes over, such as confirmation bias, as mentioned, where you suddenly believe the conspiracy account and everything that discredits the conspiracy theory, you ignore. So you kind of come into a tunnel that you can't necessarily get out of. And you don't necessarily realise you're in that tunnel either. So it's a challenge for scholars to look into ways to get through that tunnel and make someone be more critical. Because I want someone to look at conspiracy theories, of course, but I want people to be more critical of them. I want people to look at the conspiracy account, but then look at the mainstream account, kind of compare and contrast, look at different articles and think about it. Because the research that I've been conducting shows that once someone reads about a conspiracy theory, it changes their beliefs. So knowledge is power. Get the knowledge and kind of battle through the conspiracy theory. And if you believe the conspiracy after that critical evaluation, well then, okay, at least you really thought about it. And that's what I worry a lot of people don't necessarily do. Because they're so influential, they're so influential and then they're so resistant to change, they hold on to it. Which is kind of ironic, really, in that I've done my research into conspiracy theories for like so many years, so maybe I'm kind of engrossed in it, and maybe it's resistant to change for me as well. So maybe I'm part of my own advice here. But
oh my gosh, that's so meta, Dan.
I know, ridiculous.
Doctor, heal thyself. Well, Dan, we have loved having you on. You're definitely a friend of the pod.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
and thanks so much for inviting me.
I appreciate your help today because at the beginning of the episode, I was feeling a little scared about chemtrails and microwaves. But now I know. Now I know what to do.
The more you know, Beth.
The more you know. Knowledge is power.
Knowledge is power. It's a good line, isn't it?
It is a good line. I love it. Perfect. Well, thank you, Dan. And hopefully we'll get to talk to you again soon.
Absolutely. Before we go, can I plug my social media?
Oh, of course. Absolutely.
So, as mentioned for the podcast, my blog is conspiracypsychology.com, and this is with some other scholars in the area, and we write about our own research, that others do, kind of topical events, etc. And then my second thing is follow me on Twitter at Dr. Daniel Jolley for more conspiracy kind of news.
Perfect.
Fantastic.
Wow, that was really interesting to talk with Dr. Jolley.
Yeah, that was so much fun.
What do you think you learned from talking with him?
I learned that it's possible for someone to be a specialist in conspiracy theories and not be an X-Files fan. I would not have thought that was possible before. So,
yeah. When I was corresponding with him before, he had told me, he doesn't really get into the theories themselves. He's not he doesn't really even know a lot about the actual conspiracy theories. He just studies the psychology of why humans believe them. So, yeah.
I remember in the X-Files movie, this was just one of my favorite things, that there was a plot point how under certain circumstances, FEMA could declare martial law and suspend the Constitution.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and they had all kinds of protesters down at their offices, and people were like, it's just fiction. It's a movie, people. And I just thought that was so hilarious. Like FEMA, really?
Right.
FEMA's going to be in charge and is going to, put us all in camps. They could even fix New Orleans.
Right. If I have a question, so if let's say, for example, a baboon is elected president of the United States, is that a situation where FEMA could take over?
Oh, do you think that's possible? Oh, that would be so awesome.
I'm thinking, so you're saying this was fake, though. It wasn't real.
Yeah, unfortunately. Yeah.
All right. Well, hey, in a nod to Dr. Jolley's English heritage, I have an article for us to review.
All righty.
So this article is called Retired MI5 Agent Confesses on Deathbed. I Killed Princess Diana.
Okay.
So this is by yourwirenews.com, and it says news, truth, unfiltered. So one of the things that I love about this is that actually this article is under the heading of conspiracies.
Yeah, I noticed that. And it goes on to say, this man says that he worked for MI5 for 38 years as an operative, and he was often used as a hitman by the agency.
Right. At the bequest of none other than Prince Philip.
Yeah. And so I think he goes on in this article and he says that Prince Philip, told him he had to do this. And if he didn't, it was, he was going to be bad for him. I don't know. I'm sure there's definitely some shady things that go on in all countries.
Sure.
In, spy warfare, but I don't think that the people who do that are the type of people who talk about it ever, especially if you have done multiple things.
Right. So the quote in here, this kind of is too good to not read. She knew too many royal secrets. She had a huge grudge and was going to go public with all sorts of wild claims. My boss told me she had to die. He'd received orders directly from Prince Philip, and we had to make it look like an accident. I'd never killed a woman before, much less a princess, but I obeyed orders, and I did it for the queen and country. Dun, dun, dun.
But sometime in the last 20 years, you started feeling like, hey, I don't feel good about this anymore. I don't feel like I need to hang on to my secrets for queen and country. It's
funny because then he says, following the admission, he says, I can't say that I care an awful lot. And that any investigation would take forever and be very complicated. And most of my colleagues are already dead. And the ringleader, Prince Philip, will never be charged with anything, of course. So, according to this article, basically he's admitting it because it just doesn't even matter at this point. But
so let's take a look at what's wrong with this article. So for starters, who is he admitting this to?
Right. The world.
But who took down this man's confession?
Well, let's see here, because we have a Snopes article about this, about why it's fake. And basically, this is kind of a funny Snopes one because they're just like, please.
It's really short. It's super, super short.
Yeah,
normally they'll have some discussion. It's just like, oh my God, really?
Yeah. They said, the article lacked critical details such as when and where the confession occurred or how the purported assassination took place. And no other credible news outlet or even tabloid reported the story. So it's just basically being offered by this Your News site. So this was published on June 19th of 2017 by Baxter Dimitri was the author listed. And one of the things I did is I Google image searched the picture of the man in his hospital bed. And it actually came up as two different people. it came up with this article saying that he was this MI5 agent John Hopkins, but it also came up as another conspiracy theory around Princess Diana, saying that it was her former lover, James Hewitt. And these guys have about a 25-year age difference. But apparently, James Hewitt was recently in the hospital. And it linked me to this really odd YouTube video it sounded like a computer-generated voice. And it was like, Princess Diana's former lover, James Hewitt, leaves hospital. I was like, what is happening? It was so creepy. I was like,
don't ever do that again.
I'm going to call you up in the middle of the night and be like, Elizabeth. What are you doing?
God, you sound like some kind of like something out of Black Mirror. I don't like
Well, it was funny. I was like, this is funny. Like, here you have the same picture for two different conspiracy theories, both about Princess Diana. It's like they're getting lazy. They're like, oh, we got this one picture. It works for both. Let's just put it out there. So,
God, but this website is something else. So if you start clicking around on here, one of the top headlines in news is backstabbing Rubio caught working with terrorists to change U.S. laws.
Nice. You know, actually, this is funny because I looked him up on Media Bias Checker, and it actually surprised me what it said about them. It said that their factual reporting was mixed and that this site has some legit news, but there's quite a few conspiracies mixed in. And it said this site is mostly clickbait. I was really surprised that they have some legit news on there.
I saw that on there. And like, so I wanted to kind of click and see what this hybrid site was about, and no. Anytime people are talking about the Illuminati as like something that's real, that it's just the whole thing can just be thrown out. Here's a good one. This is from a couple of weeks ago. Hollywood Insider. Bill Cosby was framed by elite to stop him buying NBC.
Oh, Jesus.
So
probably liberal, right? Liberal elite.
Well, yeah, grammar aside on that, they didn't specify the variety of elite. But I would think so, given what we've talked about in previous episodes about how the elite is always liberal.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I'm going to go ahead and put this site into the fake news category and not trust any news from it as legit. Yeah. I can go ahead and get my legit news from other sources. I don't need to be looking around here unless we need an article to review, because there is some good shit on there.
Yeah, no, there's a bunch of good stuff in here. German court, Sharia police can enforce Islamic law on streets.
I like this one that says 2 people connected to the Flint water investigation found dead.
2 people in Michigan died?
Yeah, right. That were connected to the Flint water investigation. I bet that's a good conspiracy. So you know me, and you know how much I love to look up definitions of things. So I could not go through a whole episode about conspiracy theories without looking up a good definition. So I went to Wikipedia. They have a great page on conspiracy theories. And they said a conspiracy theory is an explanation of an event or situation that involves a conspiracy without warrant, generally one involving illegal or harmful act carried out by government or other powerful actors. Conspiracy theories often produce hypotheses that contradict the prevailing understanding of history or simple facts. The term is a derogatory one. That sounds very right. Mm-hmm. Definitely fits in with this conspiracy theory about this MI5 agent killing Princess Diana. Fits in with a lot of things that Dr. Jolley was talking about as well. So I liked it.
Mm-hmm. Oh, there's just one more on here that's just fun. But this is probably part of the real news that they were talking about. ISIS leader keeps rising from the dead like Rasputin.
Oh.
That sounds like a statement of fact if I've ever heard it.
Okay, the fact that Rasputin is in there definitely makes this a Russian site.
Right.
Like, this is definitely being funded by the Russians or run by the Russians at some level. Because come on, who else would put that in there? If there is an article in here that is like red cabbage sells plummet, we'll have it in the bag. That's awesome. Well, Elizabeth, is our conspiracy theory now that the episode is going to come to an end?
I think so, except you know what? I think that that's real news.
Oh, that's true. Well, what else is real? Is our Gmail real? Podcastfakenews@gmail.com?
Yep, it sure is. And it is here ready to take your show ideas and your fake news articles that you want to talk about. You could also find us on Twitter at Podcast Fake News or like us on Facebook.
Yeah, and you can follow us on those platforms too.
You can, and you should. And you should also find us on iTunes and give us a review because we need reviews. I haven't even gotten on there and given us a review yet. So I think that everyone else should spend time and do that.
I feel kind of weird about it. I don't want to review it because I don't want to be like, oh, this is so great.
The last time I checked, we had one review, and it is from our dear friend Nick, who is going to be on the show coming up. We have another interview.
Yeah, he is a philosopher. And he also has some insights into fake news. So I'm really excited to talk to him. He has been a friend of the pod from the beginning, from the bare beginning.
Number one, first friend of the pod. We totally heart Nick, and we cannot wait to talk to him.
Absolutely. And actually, he's the one who gave us the lead to talk to Dr. Jolley. So again, Nick has actually helped us with this episode as well. So,
yeah. Thanks, Nick.
Yes. You're awesome. We can't wait to talk to you. So we'll be back in 2 weeks, and we'll see everybody then.
And until then,
spread jam,
not lies.